Hello, hello, and welcome to the Color Whisperer Show. I'm Jeanette Chasworth, and I am the Color Whisperer, and I'm here to help you talk about all things home and healing. So, our body is our home, our house is our home, and all of these things work together to create healthy minds, bodies, and spirits. And that's what we're here for. And today, I have the honor of having Mary O'Connor with us, and she's going to talk about some of the emotional inside stuff that gets really messy. So welcome, Mary. Mary?
Can you?
Mark.
Hi.
Hey, Mary. Hey, Mark, can you put my garden up, please? We have the stars today. And you were talking about the moon earlier, so I guess we're gonna go out into the stars today. That's okay.
Okay, I
All
love it.
right. So Mary, tell us a little bit about you. How did you fall in fall in love with therapy? Like what do you love about it?
Yeah, so as far back as the seventh grade, I've always known that I wanted to be a therapist. It's funny, when I was really little, I wanted to be either a singer or a professional basketball player. But then I got hurt during basketball tryouts, and so I sat on the sidelines, watched the team, and I became the team psychiatrist. And ever since then, I've just, had this real passion for listening to others, for helping others. There's our garden. And yeah, I fueled that. And when I went to college, I majored in psychology. When I graduated, I worked in as a research assistant for a couple of years on a study that was testing parent-child attachments. And
Hmm.
then, that was just fascinating work. It only solidified my desire to become a psychotherapist. And so in 2015, I went to graduate school and I got my master's in social work.
That's fascinating. And to know what you wanted to be so young. I mean, that's so incredible. I mean, I didn't know what I wanted to do. They said, go to college, get a degree, you'll be fine.
Sure. Yeah.
I did. And I went into publishing after that. And I was like, this is not what I want to do. And I took a class in interior design and I fell in love. And, there's no looking back now. But um, yeah, so to know so young exactly what you want to do, that's incredible.
Yeah. And I feel like, sometimes we'll just have these moments where it just hits us and there's just this deep knowing. And it sounds like for you that happened with interior design.
Absolutely. And the healing. The first time I had healing done, I had asthma really bad and it fixed it in one. And I was like, ooh, I got to know more.
Absolutely.
Show me, show me, show me.
Totally.
So, you're talking about the parent child dynamic, and that's so huge. And I think
Mhm.
that, different generations in general handle things. I mean, I have a younger sister who's 11 years younger than me.
Okay.
And even though it's the same parents, you know, same morals, ideals, everything, the way she was brought up was so different.
Sure.
And part of it was she was the youngest,
Hmm.
and part of it was the world had changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in a time, I'm going to shut that thing off. I grew up in a time when we could go outside and play in the street and nobody thought
Mhm.
anything about it. And when she was
Sure.
young, I remember when there weren't any kids, all the kids had grown up by the time she was there. So she didn't have
Mhm.
that. She didn't have that. But there was a big thing on, oh, you can't let your kids go out and play by themselves.
Mm.
You know, that was a big thing when she was like 2 or 3 years old. So,
Huh.
like, you nowadays you would never dream of like letting kids go out and play in the middle of the street. We lived on a cul-de-sac, so it's pretty.
Yeah.
But I'm so sorry. Um,
Okay.
but we would never, today's parents. the kids stay inside. They go in their own backyard. You know,
Mm-hmm.
sister, when she was raising her kids, it was like, oh no, they can't go outside. You know, they can't go outside and play. Somebody has to be with them at all times.
Huh.
In the backyard by themselves. They have to have somebody watching them. They're 5, 6 years old. I mean, it's not like they can't go outside and play ball, you know,
Sure.
right? I mean, it's one thing they're 2. Yeah, you need to watch them, but at like 6 or 7, they should be able to go outside and, you know, play by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very different world
Totally.
that we grew up in. And it wasn't just, you know, when I was a kid, you know, nobody thought anything about, you know, spank them. And
Yeah, sure.
now it's a whole different dynamic. You know, I mean, when we were, you know, with my niece and nephew, was, oh, timeouts. You know, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you never even think about spanking kids.
Yeah.
Well, I think sometimes it's still necessary once in a while, but not like the way I was raised, you
I
know.
see. Yeah.
And so the world has changed, and changing that dynamic a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of things stand out to me about of what you just said. You know, even just the difference in being able to play outside.
Yeah,
And I'm hearing like a lot of fear, you know,
yeah,
coming up in your with your sister's generation. And it's just I get so curious about then how that fear then, you know, impacts you.
absolutely.
Is fear the message is the world around us is unsafe. And, you know, I really want to, you know, echo what you're saying about kind of the different generations and what we continue to learn about parenting. And it's hard because you know, the research continues to change. You know, I was watching the movie Meet the Fockers the other day. And there's the scene where the grandpa's trying to make the baby cry it out. You know, nobody touched the baby, just let him cry. And research is actually coming out now saying that that's not good to do, because babies need to be nurtured and cuddled and to know that they're safe. And if they're just crying and crying without somebody to show them how to regulate their nervous system, you know, that's not good.
Yeah.
And just like you're saying with the spanking, you know, I know generationally, that was a huge pattern. And I hear parents say all the time, well, I was hit and I turned out fine. But then you see the kind of other side of it, the people who aren't fine.
Right.
And who have a lot of fear, you know, from their parents or caregivers or just adults because they were hit.
Well, and I think there's a difference in spanking too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like my dad was really strong. He was a roofer. He was muscles. He was really strong. And my mom was not. And honestly, I couldn't tell the difference between. It's not like one hit me harder.
Sure,
so
sure.
there's spanking to kind of grab your attention. And it wasn't all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it was like, you know, don't run out in the street. You know, it's like, I mean, my niece a few times, she would run and you just like, you had to grab her really fast. And it was like a little, like, not hit her, but like a little like, hey, wait, you can't do that. There's a difference between I'm hitting you with all my might.
Sure.
And hey, wait a second, there's, you know, pattern interrupt. We got to stop this.
Yeah.
Or you run out into the street and then you're not here anymore.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Like a safety, like addressing safety versus, you know, I've lost it and I'm taking it out on
right.
You.
And, you know, I'm sure my parents, I tried them, but, you know, we all do.
Mm-hmm.
But it was never it was always a last resort.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just you know, I'm not going to tolerate this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But it was no, you know, no, go get the switch, or, you know, there was no marks left. And like, and I mean, they were both really, you know, my dad was really strong. So the fact that, you know, they weren't hitting me, like, and there were some parents that did really hit.
Yeah.
And, you know, that can, and if they use that too much, that can be abuse. So
absolutely.
It's a fine line.
Yeah. Yeah, it can absolutely, you know, be abuse, especially if there's like an object used and, you know, it's leaving a mark. And yeah, it's interesting seeing kind of the long lasting effects, because I work only with adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, it's interesting to see like how that can show up. in their relationships, maybe in ways that they're not even fully aware of until we start unpacking it.
Wow. So how does that show up as an adult? As somebody who grew up around, where this was normal, how does that show up?
Yeah. So I'll kind of back up and, highlight that. Like, one of the things I'm most passionate about is attachment theory,
Yes.
which basically says that the attachment that you have to your mom or your primary caregiver sets the blueprint for the rest of your relationships, as an adult. And so if you have a caregiver where you were, let's say, give an extreme example, like constantly hit, you can develop a fearful attachment towards your caregiver.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
and then that kind of sets the blueprint for your other relationships. So how can you
can't
trust anyone? Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't know if you can't trust your mom, your dad, any adults, then the message is the world is unsafe. I'm going to be hit, especially if it's not clear why.
Yeah.
Let's say a parent struggled with substance abuse and they come home and hit their kid. It just can have a child develop, very fearful mindset of the world around them.
And that not feeling safe is such a huge part of being, just being. Like, if you don't feel safe, that affects your relationships, it affects your money, it affects your job, it affects performance, it affects everything.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed, like when I was little, it was, well, your parents know everything, right? Brought up in a little house in the prairie in the Waltons, and parents always seem to know the right thing to do. And it doesn't mean that none of us really had parents like that, but that was the ideal. And so, but what I do like is today's parents seem to allow the children to go with them on the journey of grief or of struggle, and say, I have a friend who's got 3 kids, and he went through COVID. He had long COVID, and there were some issues, and he didn't put the burden on them, but he's like, hey, look, I want you to know I'm struggling right now. This is what's going on.
Sure.
And he let them, this is how I'm overcoming it. And I think it's such a valuable lesson, instead of just, my parents, that generation, they were told just to, you didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
And by being open with our kids and saying, hey, we want to show you how we're dealing with it. My nephew came to visit. I had a miscarriage the night before, and he came to visit the next day. And he's like 5 years old. And he comes up to me and he says, Jeanette, you're so sad. And I said, yes. I wasn't going to explain what a miscarriage was.
Sure.
But I'm like, that was overload. And I said, well, somebody very close to me died last night. And so he could see the tear. He could feel that. That made sense to him.
Yeah.
And he just put his arms around me. Come here, can I hug you? Yes, you can hug me. And he just sat on my lap, and he, we just sat there for a few minutes, and we talked a little bit about what that meant. But it was a way to say, okay, it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel pain.
Yes.
And my life didn't stop either. This is how we go through it together. And
Absolutely.
so, and I see that happening more than it was in my generation.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things you just said that really stand out to me, and one of which is the felt sense. As humans, there's one thing to say I'm okay, but then there's another thing you can feel people's energy. Especially kids. Kids quite literally need their parents or need their loved adults to survive. So they can be so in tune with mom or with auntie when if mom's not okay, and this is like all happens unconsciously, right? But if mom's not okay, am I going to be okay?
Yeah.
And, like with your nephew, he could see that you're sad. He could probably feel that too. And so I think it's beautiful how you handled that and explained, like, yeah, I am sad. Because then it's teaching him that, how to recognize sadness, that sadness is okay. And also how to process it.
Hey, Mark.
Hey there, y'all were having such a deep conversation. I actually had a couple of thoughts that were crossing my mind, and I'd love to hear Mary's thoughts about them and everything. And one actually involves a coworker of mine here in Pod TV. But first, I'll get to the lighthearted question because y'all were talking about kids and how intuitive they are. And I know because we were talking about it beforehand that you are both what I would call, and some people would call, cat moms, and all along those lines. And in my mind, a lot of times those can be some of the best therapists out there because I know that when I've had cats and when I have gone through some depressions, whether that was relationships or the loss of somebody, sometimes the animal, and I don't have a cat right now or a dog, but sometimes the animal, and particularly the cat, would sense what was going on and would even sometimes come over there to comfort you and all along those lines. So that's what I meant when I said that sometimes I think that our animals can be the best therapists out there because they can understand what we as humans are going through. And sometimes that is when they feel the need to kind of come over there and comfort us when we think that we are providing for them. But maybe I'm just reading too much into it. But what is your thoughts, Mary, and everything along those lines? Because definitely I am a big believer in animals and sometimes even plants. I know
Yeah.
the plants in the background and everything being something that can help in that therapy space. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think animals can also feel it. And it's, I can make the parallel to kids, right? Animals need us to survive. They can feel our energy. I have a quick story about that even. I adopted my cat back in November. And she was about a year old. She was on the streets for a while, probably a lot of trauma, it sounds like, was very, very skittish. And it took her a couple months to warm up. And so in December, so I've had her about a month, maybe 6 weeks. There was one weekend and something came up and I got really anxious all of a sudden. And she came up to me and she hadn't really been on the couch that much yet. She was still pretty scared, but she jumped up on the couch and was circling me and meowing and making biscuits on me. And it was just really, really amazing to see because she hadn't done that before, but I think she could really feel how anxious I was in that moment and came to comfort me.
Yeah.
Same thing with dogs too. My old dog, when I was sick, always wouldn't leave my side.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking, that and all of those. I'm going to turn the conversation back over to y'all and everything. But there's the other thing that was a more serious note. I was actually thinking about that when you mentioned some of your work in certain communities and definitely around some of those that have been incarcerated and all along those lines. But I've got a friend of mine that is on the network here, meaning Pod TV, and he sometimes is very adamant about part of the problems in the African American community, and I'm proud to be part of that community, is that there is a lot of broken families and a lot of single mother households, and he sometimes will try to lay the blame of some of that culture on that broken family. And I'm thinking that there are things that are greater than that. But I just wanted your take on that because we do know that there are folks that sometimes get into the penal system because of that. But I don't think that you can totally lay the blame just on the single parent households and all of that.
Well, I've got a lot to say on this topic. And I'll start just kind of framing myself in this space. So what brought me out to California was my graduate school for my second year placement sent me to the San Francisco County jails. And that's where, I did my second year internship and I was working on parenting work with the guys and women that were in there. And, when you think of how important attachments are and to have that disrupted attachment, have a mother or a father taken away, that's really hard on kids. How could it not be? And it's also what's we like to call an ambiguous loss, where it's not quite clear, right? Because they're still alive, but it is a loss. They're not in the home anymore. You have to go in and visit. And when you visit, it's not a warm or welcoming environment. You have to deal with guards who often treat family members like they're criminals themselves. And in terms of the broken family, I think it's really important to highlight the systems that create that. I wholeheartedly believe that our criminal justice system is modern day slavery. It really hit me in the face when I was working there. And when you do the research on the war on drugs, you know, it's intentional. Crime was going down, and it was shown that prisons weren't effective. And then what happened, the messaging in the 70s, starting with Nixon, the tough on crime, the war on drugs, Reagan exacerbated it. And so, yeah, I just want to, name the oppressive systems that are at play here, because I think it's hard to just blame the broken families without calling out the systems that are contributing to that.
Right. I definitely agree with you on that. Like I said, you're going to depart and let y'all continue the conversation. But one thing I was curious about is how important has therapy work? Because you mentioned that being even in that penal system, because I know that I've had friends, including poets, that have gone into the prisons, and sometimes that is some of the best attempts at what some people would call getting them back into the mainstream and all along those lines. So kind of like getting them to get out of their criminal ways and everything. So definitely all along those lines. I know that whether it's poetry or art or a number of other types of therapy, that is oftentimes used. So I just wondered if you ever used that and how that was effective.
Yeah. So, I would provide individual therapy to most of my clients were dads. And I found that to be really powerful. And also what I think part of what was helpful about it was just having somebody there that treats them like a human. I would be very intentional about calling my clients their names, even when the guards were like, number this, I'd be like, no, Mr. Smith, I'm here to see Mr. Smith. And, I think programming is great, and it's so important for healing. And a huge also just component about that is treating human beings as human beings.
100%. Yeah, I mean I just had like 6 thoughts go through my head. So tell us a little bit about your specialty and how you work with attachment therapy is your specialty. So how do you work with people to overcome? Because like you're dealing with, we all have a struggle. I mean, there's no parent that's perfect. I mean,
of course,
human, and you can, and then there's a lot of pressure on the parent. Like, oh, I got to do this right, and I got to do that right. You know? And sometimes parenting just kind of happens.
Sure.
I had my niece and nephew were both staying over, and they were arguing over who was going to sleep where in the bed. And I'm like, there's only so many, so many places they can sleep, right? It's a big bed, and then okay. And I went through, all the computations, and they're like, no. And they're crying. And I was like, I was at my wit's end. And I said,
sure,
you know what? I'm going to give you guys 5 minutes. You're going to solve this problem, and I'll be back. Because I didn't know what else to do. I'd like to tell you it was great parenting skills. I was like, I need a break. I'm going to go out and in 5 minutes, and if they haven't, we'll figure something out. But I needed to stop because I was just frustrated.
Sure. Yeah.
And, I go back in there, they're laughing, they're giggling. I'm going to sleep here. He's going to sleep there. Okay, cool. They're like 4 or 5 years old, And but sometimes, they just need to figure it out themselves.
Sure.
And, I had my nephew, I have a pond, and it seems like they all seem to need to be baptized in it one way or another. But one of my nephews was, he was out with his father. He was, father was right there. And I get the other one comes in, Jeanette, something's happened. And it's November, right? And so anyway, he fell in the pond. So I go grab a towel. I'm going out and I grab him. And his father's got him. But, I think they're both scared. It was his father's first child, so he's like, he was a little confused too.
Yeah.
So I wrapped the kid in the towel and I said, "Did you try to go swim with my fish?" In the house, and my thought isn't getting the kid warm, right? And I put him in the bath, and my sister comes in and she says, "Oh, well, that way he won't be afraid of water. I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking, but the thing is, and you can take the same experience and have two different kids
Totally.
and have total different experiences of it too,
Yeah.
depending
Absolutely.
on how they react to stress.
Yes, that is completely true. Two people can experience the same event and have interpreted differently, and in turn have different outcomes. One thing I want to kind of bring up, because I hear what you're saying with, there's a lot of pressure on parents. And I get that. I'm not a parent myself yet, but I work with a lot of parents, and I really see that. And I know there's...
You don't have to be a mom.
Sure. But there's, I think maybe this fear of like, am I going to screw my kids up? One of my favorite psychological theorists that talks about this is Winnicott. And he talks about being the good enough parent, which means, you don't have to be perfect, because nobody is, but you need to be just good enough to meet your kids' needs, show up for them, teach them. And hey, life isn't perfect.
No.
And I think it goes a long way to address those imperfections. To say, hey, I lost my cool there. That wasn't okay. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Here's how I should have handled it better. How are you feeling? I understand if you're mad at me. It's okay to feel angry. And, you're acknowledging what you did wrong, kind of what you were saying earlier. You're showing them resilience. You're showing them a different way.
And you're showing them how do they make compensation for, because they're going to act out. They're human, right?
Sure.
And so when they get to that place where their hormones are out of whack, or they just had a bad day and they don't know how to handle it, and they fly off the handle.
Yeah.
Then they have the experience of, okay, wait, I have to do this. It's not just, well, I'm the parent and I get to do this and it's okay. And because it's not. But when you have the parent saying, hey, look, I'm human too.
Yeah.
It gives the child so much more power.
Totally. And I think there's a parallel that happens with therapy as well. Because I'm also imperfect.
Right.
Right. And so I'll even use that in the clinical relationship. I'll make a mistake. Maybe I show up late, or I say something that doesn't land how I intended it to. And I've seen healing transpire by having those conversations, being like, hey, that wasn't right. I'm sorry. What was that like for you? And process that together. And for some people who have never had that kind of interaction can feel healing.
And I love what you said, process that together, because that's going to affect friendships. That's going to affect a spouse. That's going to affect how they work in the workforce. Is like, that processing that together makes such a whole out of pieces that it has outreaching effects.
Totally.
Yeah, along those same lines and everything, I was just wondering, because one of the things that I've heard people complain about, and you've kind of talked about it before, Jeanette, on some of these shows and everything, is how a lot of parents, and I am not a parent yet either, and at 62 probably won't be, but I kind of agree with what Jeanette said earlier, that a lot of us caregivers wind up being parent figures, whether it is a mother figure or a father figure. So I know there are a number of kids that I mentor and that I help, some that are now well into their adulthood and all along those lines. But I was thinking about a very popular TV show that I think had a very bad name, because I don't know that the name actually fit what it was talking about. Because there used to be this show even that was around even before when I was a youth. So it's probably around in like the 60s or the 50s, called Fathers Knows Best, or Fathers Know Best and everything. And I'm going like, I don't know, a lot of fathers don't necessarily know best, and a lot of people can't necessarily live the Cosby life either, which is kind of this feeling of what a family should look like in the kind of middle class environment, whatever the middle class is, and no matter what culture you are in, and all along those lines. But I just wanted your take on this notion that the TV has replaced parenting a lot, and a lot of people are letting the TV kind of dictate their own parenting styles and their own care of their kids.
Sure. And it's interesting you bring up that show. I feel like I treat people that grew up with that show and like have that kind of internalized messaging of father knows best. And so we could do a lot of unlearning, you know, through that process. You know, in terms of like the TV or the iPad, you know, hey, like I get it. Like I understand that can be a available resource. You know, parents, you got to take care of yourselves. But I'm thinking of like what Jeanette was sharing earlier about, you know, the generations that grew up playing outside. And I just, you know, I remember as a kid playing outside and how, you know, impactful that was for my childhood. I remember the times, I'll just speak about myself here, that, you know, I was maybe left alone watching TV, and the difference that just those two things had on my mental health. You know, one where I felt like I had friends and was supported and there was community, and the other, I personally felt alone. So I can't speak for all kids, all parents, but I do think it's, you know, there is that beauty of connection. And I worry about devices replacing that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You know, I've got to teach you and everything because you're talking about outside and your parent and discipline and everything. But I can tell you that in certain cultures, including my own family culture and all along those lines, there was this notion of going outside to get the switch. And if you came back with the wrong switch, you're going to be in trouble because they're going to make you go out and get a bigger switch and all along those lines. So if you came back with like a little small switch thinking that was going to work, and that, you know, the folks would send you back and be like, no, that's not going to work. And then they would also do what I call psychological torture. And you might get understand what I'm saying, Mary? Because they would make it whistle and do other things. So if you are a kid or a teenager, you're going like, well, that's going to hit me. I know it's going to sting because of the way that you are doing this kind of variation of psychological torture.
Yeah. And I guess like I'd ask, you know, anyone that experienced that, like what was the impact?
Yeah, right.
You know, how did that make you feel when you went through that?
And I think a lot of people, they still have that impact on them. And sometimes it has made them stronger citizens, but sometimes it has also made them afraid to speak out, as y'all were talking about earlier, because sometimes kids need to be able to speak out on their truth and all along those lines. But sometimes if you were raised that way, then you might not be as open to the possibility of actually speaking your truth. Totally.
Yeah, it can impact your feeling safe enough to speak your truth. And there can also be a messaging there that violence is okay. It's okay to hit. And so that can then become a cycle.
Right.
I was hit, so I hit. I was hurt, so I hurt.
No, I don't think I've ever told Jeanette this, but I've definitely, we've talked about so much other things on this show, but I've definitely seen that even with some of the relationships that I've been in, because I know that there were some that were in abusive situations, so they would sometimes lash back out. I know one woman that was in an abusive situation and literally almost threw an iron at me and everything, and I'm going like, no, this is not necessarily the situation that I need to be in when they got to that point. So I literally walked away. You know, sometimes you got to walk out of negative situations. So that was one that I literally walked out of because I was going like, this is going a little bit too far.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, there's that trauma triangle where there's the victim, the victimizer, and the bystander.
Right.
And unless we really address that and heal what's hurt, we become more likely to repeat that. Like you said, somebody was, you know, a victim themselves, then they become a victimizer because that's their way they're trying to work through the trauma.
Yeah, no doubt about that and everything. So I can definitely see that, and definitely the importance of, even when you are an adult, sometimes that can get to you. Because in another situation, I had literally gotten to the point, and I thought as a therapist, you'd probably enjoy this, of somebody was so concerned about where my eyes might be going that they got me to the point that I literally one time went traveling with mom, and I think she was probably close to my age now. Maybe she was like younger. She might have been in her 50s. I might have been in my 30s. And she's going like, Mark, why are you looking at the floor and everything? Because I was literally walking to the point that I had been conditioned in order to deal with this kind of trauma, a repeat trauma that another person had put me through. So literally, was like, Mark, why are you looking down? Why are you not looking forward and everything?
Yeah. Wow. It's amazing how our body just naturally responds and how other people can see, hey, something's up.
Right. Yeah, she was the person that noticed it. And like I said, I had been such a conditioning standpoint, because sometimes we can be conditioned by the folks that are in our lives, whether it's a spouse or a significant other or even family members, that we don't necessarily notice it, but other people that are around us we'll notice it and observe it quicker than we will, because sometimes
Absolutely.
we're scared to internalize and to analyze ourselves internally, even though I know that
Mhm.
that talks about often on this show is coming to peace with who you are as yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm gonna leave it to y'all, but yeah, definitely that was just some thoughts that crossed my mind. But definitely this whole notion of successful parenting, because I know that
Yeah.
proud. I think my brother has done a good job with my two nephews, so I think that they have done
That's
good
awesome.
parenting and all along those lines. Even though he's divorced from their mother, so sometimes they have to do that whole notion of making sure that they are raising them together, even though they are not
Sure.
themselves.
So important. Yeah.
Very important to have a united front co-parenting,
Yes.
whether you are living together or not,
100%. So
because
important.
you can have different ideas of parenting in the same household, and that can be just as disruptive as
Mhm.
when they're not. So
Yeah.
we've got a lot of moms out there, so let's talk about, and dads and caretakers, because
Uh-huh.
I never gave birth, but not to a full-term baby anyway. And yet, I've definitely had a very huge role in a lot of kids' lives, actually.
Oh, yeah.
But let's talk about some tips to how do we create good attachment with our children.
Sure. So I think kind of a first step is to, this can happen through therapy or, other healing practices as well. But I think it's important to understand your own attachment style and understand how you were raised. And if you have let's say, an insecure attachment style, that's okay. But I think just kind of knowing that, maybe going to therapy, trying to develop more security within your relationships, because what can happen is we pass down our attachment styles.
Take a few minutes because not everybody may understand what that
Yeah.
means in the different ones. So can we go through that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. So the famous experiment around attachment theory was developed by a researcher named Mary Ainsworth, and it's called the Strange Situation Experiment. And I'll just give a quick overview on how it's run, but basically how it's set up is that there's a mom and their baby in a room that's set up like a waiting room. And after a couple of minutes, a stranger walks in. Then the stranger starts talking to mom. Then mom leaves and the baby's left alone with the stranger. And there's a couple episodes of this. At one point, the baby's in the room alone. But essentially what the study was looking for was how the baby responded and acted when they were together, what happened when mom left, and what happened when mom came back. And so it was determined there's about 3 attachment classifications. A 4th has been added since. But babies who were found to be secure, they were upset when mom left. They'd search for her, maybe get upset, cry. But when she came back, they're happy to see her, reach up, wanted to be held, and were easily comforted by the mom. So those are our secure babies. Babies who were classified as preoccupied, or what that translates to an anxious attachment style as an adult, they got really upset when mom left, almost inconsolable. And then when mom came back, they were so upset that it was hard for her to comfort the baby. Maybe they eventually get there, but just it took a while, longer than, let's say, the secure baby. Quick note on that, like in adulthood, this can look like having a fear of abandonment. The 3rd classification of babies we're dismissive, which translates to an avoidant attachment as an adult. So maybe on the surface, it didn't look like they noticed or cared when mom left. I say on the surface because research shows, that there's actually a lot going on underneath that. They do actually care, but they're not showing it. And then same thing when mom came back, there was some resistance there. Maybe mom would pick them up. They'd kind of put an arm between them and mom. Maybe they acted like they didn't notice when mom came back. And, as I said, like as an adult, this can translate to like having an avoidant attachment. And then the fourth category was what is called either cannot classify or disorganized. So this could happen if a child is really fearful of a caregiver, or maybe there was a confusion in family roles. So perhaps they related more to mom as if they were a sibling, let's say. So those are kind of the 4 general attachment styles. This is a very watered down version. I encourage anybody to read the original research. It's really cool. But basically, we all have an attachment style. And if you find yourself, not having a secure attachment style like that, that is okay. You are who you are. And, it's important to, I don't want to say important, but it can be helpful to try to heal that. Just so for yourself, and then also for your babies, so that you can try to stop that intergenerational cycle, because parents tend to parent how they were parented. Yeah. It's only natural. Or maybe they parent the opposite. Yeah.
It's what they know, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So how can you break that chain? Like, let's say you're an insecure attachment person.
Yeah.
So how do you create a secure attachment with your child?
Great. So what I love about attachment theory is that there's room for hope and room to heal this. So there's a thing that's called earned security. So if you can develop a secure relationship, so sometimes this happens with a therapist, but it also doesn't have to be a therapist. It could be with somebody you date later in life who maybe they have a secure attachment. So what can kind of help? It depends on your attachment style. I can say what's helped with me in my journey.
Sure.
I've had a historically anxious attachment style. And so for me in my journey, it was learning to ask for reassurance, to acknowledge my needs and communicate them so that I could get my needs met. If I'm worried about a person leaving, that fear of abandonment, addressing that directly and explaining up front, like, hey, I might need a reassurance. And then finding people that are okay providing that. And that has done wonders for my own personal healing and growth.
Very cool.
So, this could, earlier you asked me kind of how I work as a therapist. So what I like to do with, the clients that I work with is, hear them out. Like, we'll start with what brings them into treatment. Usually it's like a anxiety or depression, let's say. Then really getting down to the roots. But let's talk about your childhood. Understanding how they show up in current relationships and how the relationships have been historically, all the way back to relationships with mom or dad or caregiver. And then, over time, and this can take some time, but developing a sense of security with a therapist. As I was saying earlier, it can go a long way when therapist acknowledges, hey, I messed up, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And that can be like what we call a corrective emotional experience. So they learn, hey, there are people out there that feel safe.
Yeah.
That will acknowledge when they goof. And if I can find this, and whether it's therapy or a friendship or a romantic relationship, it kind of then sets another blueprint. So what else is possible.
I love it. And you can have within the same family, different kids can have different attachment styles.
Yeah. And even with different people, you can see your attachment to your mom and your attachment to your dad might be different.
Mm-hmm.
Or, mom, dad, and auntie or friends, so you, as a child, you can have different attachments to each parent. And yeah, same with siblings. It's really interesting to see how birth order, how different life experiences, people can grow up in the same household and have very different experiences of what their childhood was like.
100%. And it's like, sometimes it can just be what's going on in the world, what's going on in the family. So like, I was a year old when my father died. Mm-hmm. And so it hit me very hard. Mm-hmm. My sister, who was still in utero, her experience of that death was very different than mine.
Sure.
And then she had a lot of illness when she was born.
Hmm.
And my youngest sister, who wasn't there during all that time, she didn't experience any of the
Sure.
grief. She didn't experience any of the, oh my God, what's going on with Teresa, rushing to the hospital all the time. And,
Hmm.
so the Teresa that she knew was already settled. Like
For
we knew
sure.
like medications were settled, like we knew what to
Yeah.
do, all that stuff. So
Hmm.
she has no memory of Teresa being difficult,
Yeah.
So there's been some times we've had some arguments, and I'm like, do you know what family you were brought up in? Like, do you not know the
Mhm.
history of just even this generation?
I
But
see.
it wasn't in her lifetime, and it's not
Yeah.
real for her in the way that it's real for me.
Totally. Yeah, you had a really big loss when you were so little at a crucial time.
So, the age that somebody is, I have a
Oh
friend
yeah.
who lost her sister. So there's like 5 kids. Well, the
Mhm.
oldest kid experiencing that loss is going to be very different from the youngest kid experiencing
Yeah.
that loss. And then
Yeah.
how did the parents deal with the grief, and how did that
Oh
affect
yeah.
each of the different, ages? The older ones are like, well, I'm kind of getting ready to leave the house anyway. And,
Yeah.
maybe they tried to help mom and dad and cover up some of the, where they might have been falling down.
Mhm.
But the youngest is like, hey, what happened to everybody?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And what you just said, it made me think of, something else as we started talking about healing attachments.
Yes.
Um, I think one of the most important things a parent can do is teach their kids that feelings are okay.
Yeah.
What made me think of this when you're talking about grief and a parent's grief. Like we were saying earlier, it's okay to have that grief and talk about it with your child. We could talk more about that too, in ways to not overwhelm them, let's say, but educate, like, hey, I am sad. This is how I'm dealing with it. I see a lot where people come to me because let's say they have anxiety, and it's because they don't know how to access their emotions. I know being a parent's hard. It's like, you don't want your kid to be mad at you.
Right.
That can be really uncomfortable to sit with. But that's actually healthy.
Yeah. We have to be the truth tellers. And
Yeah.
sometimes they're going to get mad, and that's.
Yeah. And that's okay. And it's okay to be mad. It's okay to be sad, like whatever it is, to help give your kids the words for their feelings. And then also modeling how you cope.
Yeah.
You can be mad, like you can't, I don't know, shatter a glass, but you can like yell into a pillow or stomp your feet, modeling and teaching them how to process these emotions so they don't just keep it all inside.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, and I kind of alluded to it earlier with the broken family statement and everything, but I know that the impact, and you were talking, Jeanette, about what went on when you lost your father and everything, but I can say that the impact of my parents' divorce was probably different on me than it was on my brother, because my brother literally was living with my parents when they got divorced, and I was already in college. So, like I said, I just remember getting a phone call in here and that there was a divorce in process, and definitely having to process that, whereas Malik, my brother, probably had to deal with it in person and figure out which parent he was going to go live with, and a number of other things that I did not necessarily have to do as much and everything. So like I said, I think he processed it well, but like I said, I haven't had that conversation, so I'm not sure exactly what was going on, but I do know that it was a different impact. And I was just wondering your thoughts around that, because divorce, there's a number of folks that are divorced, the divorce rate is whatever ridiculous rate it is and everything. So I just wanted your thoughts about that as an attachment situation as well. And if I can add just a little bit to that, the other thing that happened in my life was that, and I've told Jeanette this before, was that in some ways there was a third kid, because like I said, it's me and my younger brother, but my parents were actively creating a radio station, a community radio station. So in some ways I think of that as the third kid, because a lot of times they were spending as much time there as they were raising us and all along those lines, because there were times that and it was good in some ways because I got to go after school literally to the radio station, but I also knew that I had various parents coming back to that caregiving and everything, but I also knew that my parents were involved in work, and so I was there in their work environment, so it probably impacted some of their parenting, and for all I know, it could have led to the divorce. I don't know that fact.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on what you just shared. With divorce, it makes a lot of sense that it impacted you differently than your brother. And, kind of what Jeanette was saying earlier, I think the age of, what age you're at when something like that happens can really matter. When is the divorce happening developmentally? It's going to impact a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old potentially differently, 5-year-old and an 8-year-old differently. And then just based on where you are developmentally. And then there's a lot of, I want to say dynamics even within that to break down. With siblings, for example, sometimes an older sibling might take on a parent role. They feel like maybe they need to take care of their younger sibling, or, even sometimes take care of their parent. Divorce is stressful. And if you see your mom, I don't want to gender this, we could go with either, but you see a parent sobbing, right? They're not okay. I need mom to survive. I need to make sure she's okay. So I'm going to step up.
Yeah.
And it's this, again, this is all happens unconsciously. No kid is sitting there having these actual thoughts, or maybe, but that they're totally aware of, but it's this felt sense, right? And so, I think divorce can impact people in a lot of different ways. And also how the parents are communicating that to the kids, how they're communicating that to each other. There's a lot of different ways that children can be impacted by divorce, including positive ones as well, if it was not a healthy marriage and, was handled with grace and with respect for each other.
No doubt about that and everything. I think we need a parenting show on the network, and maybe Mary needs to do it, even though she's not a parent and all along those lines. But definitely, she seems to have some great advice and all along those.
It's about experience. I mean, I've had kids all around me my whole life. And when I have a friend who adopted, and the first day she got the kid, she got 2 to 3 days old. And the little girl wouldn't take the bottle. And she called me up. She said, Jeanette, I need help. I'm like, okay, come here. Let me show you what to do. So it's like being a parent, and we're caretakers, right? You're a great uncle. I'm a great aunt. It's not just about the act of giving birth, because there's a lot of people out there that, let's face it, they've given birth, maybe many times, and they still don't know about parenting. And then there are people who, I wasn't able to, but it doesn't make me less of a parent. It doesn't make my knowledge not worth something.
Yeah.
And you've done a lot of studying in this field, and, giving birth isn't the be all end all of the answer. It's how well do you relate to kids? How well can you create an environment that everybody feels safe,
Yeah. And, a couple of things you say really resonate with my personal experience. Both my parents were very hardworking. And so I was also raised by a nanny. And she didn't have kids of her own, but I view her still to this day as a third parent.
Absolutely.
And, we could probably do a whole episode on adoption. But my mom was adopted. And, it's just the ways that it impacts you.
It's huge.
And what she's, been saying to me a lot lately is, she was always taught that she should be lucky. You should feel lucky. And, well, maybe that's true. She did, quote unquote, get lucky. She had a family that loved her very much and cared for her. But what that's missing in that moment is acknowledging how hard that experience must have been for her.
Yeah.
As kids, we need our parents, and to be taken away as such a baby, that's going to impact you.
I know we're winding down. I know we're winding down, but Mary, just really quickly, is the attachment theory, is there differences culturally? Because it does seem to me that some of my friends that are of the Latin American culture might have a different view around attachment and attachment theory than some of my Anglo and even fellow African American friends. So I just wondered, is attachment theory have differences culturally? Because I think there's even some that are Asian that are different as well. But I just wanted your take on that, because it does seem like there are
Sure.
differences culturally.
That is a fantastic question, and I'm so glad you ask it. And I want to name that a lot of the literature out there, at least the ones that I've been exposed to, are written by white people.
Mm-hmm.
I know the strange situation, I'm pretty sure. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I think the first study was done on mostly white families. So I think it's a great question. And, I'd be really curious to even like explore that more and even hear maybe what you're noticing as maybe things that you're saying, this sounds different than what, Mary's been seeing.
Yeah, would be interested to know that and everything. That's a problem I have with some studies. It's actually, I don't think I've told you that before, but that's some of my problem with Ancestry.com. And I know that's a separate topic, but I sometimes feel that what you are testing against is European based, which is why a lot of African Americans and Asians and others come back with a European part of their ancestry, because their test sample is European. So therefore it would be a European based sample in there and everything, according to the way I think about it. But I could be wrong too.
No, I think it's a great point. And we need to center non-white voices.
Yeah, definitely agree with that and everything. Like I said, y'all could have an easily 2-hour show, and if I didn't have to run off, I'd give y'all an hour and a half or 2 hours. But that's probably got to run off as well shortly and everything. But I could easily hear y'all talking for an hour and a half to 2 hours, because it's definitely been delightful and everything. But I'll let y'all have the few minutes of this time. You can go a little bit over, but yeah, depending on what Jeanette's own schedule is and everything. But yeah, I was definitely enjoying it. It's going like they could have a 2-hour show easily.
Well, we can do it again.
Yeah.
Have you come on again. So we do have just a couple minutes left. So I want you to plug yourself, talk about, how we can reach you. And if you have any special offers or what you want to, what your main focus is, let's do that. And then we'll go to Kendo Spice.
Okay. So my name is Mary Catherine O'Connor. I am a licensed psychotherapist in private practice. I currently have slots available for individual therapy. So if you're interested about anything that we talked about today, if you have anxiety or depression, or you find yourself in the same patterns that you keep repeating, and you're looking to maybe explore the root causes of what might be going on, I encourage you to outreach me. It's Mary Catherine with a C, so CATHERINE, LCSW. So I have that handle on everything. So on Instagram, it's Mary Catherine LCSW, Gmail, Mary Catherine LCSW, and website, MaryCatherineLCSW.com.
Talk about consistency. I love it.
Consistency, we got it on everything. And, I currently do have a couple of sliding scale spots available as well. I'm out of network with insurance companies. Could probably talk way more than we have time for about that. But if you're just curious and want to talk more, I do offer a 15 to 30 minute discovery call just to hear about what's been going on with you and to see if I might be able to help you. And even if I can't, maybe I can help connect you with somebody that can as well.
I love what you're doing. And I've seen it in my niece and nephew and the struggles that they had, but having that attachment really makes such a big difference in working through the process, because none of us are perfect. We all have our issues and our insecurities, and what you're doing helps the inner child, the adult, and generations beyond that, because how many people does that person touch?
Absolutely.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on today, and we can talk about doing another session and getting into some deeper issues. Awesome. So now we go to Kendo Spice so that we can have healthy bodies.
You You know how people love to enjoy food and don't understand how to flavor their food or how to replicate a meal? They're interested in supplements but don't know where to begin? Well, what I do is I take the guesswork out of enjoying flavor and wellness with my flavorful spice blends so that they can create delicious meals with healing benefits. Can Do Spice was created to help cooks at any level enjoy healing through food. Every spice blend was designed to give added health benefits of natural herbs. Every blend is complete. There's no need to add any additional spice for a delicious meal. Saving you time and money while adding supplements to your meals can be both tasty and fun. My earliest memories in the kitchen began with my father, Kenny Can Do Bond, so it was fitting that I would name this line after him. I have always looked to natural remedies to supplement the body, and I found myself hiding herbs and minerals in foods for my family. That's when it hit me. Everyone needs Can Do Spice. Everyone should be having this. It's an exclusive brand for cooks at any level who want to create flavorful dishes with healing benefits that can satisfy the body and soul. Add a little spice to your life. Give Can Do Spice a try.